Hi, my name is Karen Holmes. I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. I wanted to expound on some information that I gave you earlier this morning. And this was about Donald Trump and his whether or not he was going to respond by an act of aggression against Iran in response to the election, and whether or not he was going to win that. The fourth row of the World Peace Marketing Strategy is for the people who function for their own interests. The way you can tell that somebody is functioning for their own interests is if you ask them the question, who has what you want? Okay, that person will answer somebody who's 180 degrees from where they think they are. They're actually moving backwards away from what they want. They can't picture the idea of moving the opposite direction. It's because they're backwards in their thinking. 25% of the population is in this situation. So this is a really difficult group of people to deal with. They function for their own interests. Now, in a way, everybody is in this situation part of the time. If a family is dealing with a situation, and you're a neighbor, you're functioning for your own interests. What's happening over there is really none of your business. You're still functioning for your own interests. But when it comes to somebody in power, like the President of the United States, who's functioning for his own interests, then you run into real problems. So what we're looking at is a group of people who have the capacity to cause a lot of problems. During the American Revolution, that group of people, you had, first of all, the first group of people were the first 25% who came into the World Peace Movement, the American Revolution movement, were those who stood on the principles. They were like John Quincy Adams, the Patrick Henry, the people who were the Sons of Liberty. They were the ones who stood on the principles. They saw the problem and they started to recognize it, and they started to work towards it. They may not have been completely ready to declare independence at first, but they recognized the problems. And most of the people didn't see the need. They were loyalists and didn't see the need for a revolution. Okay, or to stand up and protest. The second group of people came in were like Alexander Hamilton, because they were in it for the money and the power. That was their focus. So if you look today at what's happening, the same thing is happening now between the Democrats and the Republicans. You see the Democrats standing on the principles and the Republicans rebelling because it's going to cost too much money. It's going to be, you're interfering in our lives, so they're rebelling against that. Mitch McConnell is an example. But then you're also seeing within each of the parties, the same thing is happening. You see somebody like, let's say, Bernie Sanders was focused on principles during the 2016 election, and then Hillary Clinton was focused on power. Okay, so we have principles and power. The third group of people to come in are the people whose lives are affected. Those are the average people in the world, and basically their lives are being affected. The fourth group of people function for their own interests. So when the President of the United States is functioning for his own interest, then you're running into real problems. These are the people who can cause rebellions. These are the people who are causing problems. Okay? They're they're functioning for their own interests. And if you ask them who who will help them get their life, they're 180 degrees from where they think they are. An example of this is if you ask Donald Trump, and this is just my opinion, I may be wrong on this, but if you ask Donald Trump who has what he wants, over the last 4 years, he's demonstrated that Vladimir Putin has what he wants, because he will trust he will trust Russian intelligence over U.S. intelligence. The idea of like the Steele dossier, the people like that was kind of the telling influence there. Because the Steele dossier, from what I understand, I may be wrong on this, but what I had read someplace was Oleg Deripaska had supplied information for Christopher Steele, and that was something that, and the Steele dossier, that was something that Deripaska had been supplying information to the FBI or the CIA or whatever. And so Donald Trump, because he knows Putin and Deripaska and all these people, then he was trusting them over U.S. intelligence and supporting that idea. He will listen to Putin and he will say, like in the Helsinki speech that they gave together, he will support Putin. He has what he wants. Now, like I said, 25% of the population on the planet functions for their own interests. And now, so what I'm going to do is that's just an example of what I'm saying. So the question is, how do you deal with that? Okay, the fourth row of the World Peace Marketing Strategy addresses this idea. It's the World Peace Marketing Strategy allows everybody to get their life, what they want. Okay, it's a way, in a way, it's like a pathway to heaven for each of the four groups. The first group is the people who stand on the principles, and they like Bernie Sanders generally get slammed by the people who are functioning for power and going down into power games, and then but the people who are in the power games, the second group to come in, basically a lot of times they're the ones that will work with the fourth row people, and they seem like they're together, but they're not really, because they have different goals. Okay. And in the case of Donald Trump and the United States, we have the four groups of people in the United States, but then we also have Russia and China functioning for their own interests too. And that's where we can come into some problems now in the United States in terms of, and around the world. I mean, we are functioning for our own interests when it comes to dealing with Iran, dealing with Iraq, and all the other countries too. So we are part of this group some of the time in our own country, and some of the times depending on different relationships. So this is not something where you are automatically standing on the principles. It's you're functioning for your own interests in different kind of relationships, and as they're playing out, that's when it becomes evident. So the fourth row people in something like this relationship, like in the relating to Donald Trump, what we have is the people who do that, who function for their own interests. What they do is they can be intolerant. They can then create a sense of waves, ripples, and how we got into trouble was in the Iraq War in the United States. The Iraq War, the United States was functioning for our own interests when it came to the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. So George W. Bush, with his intolerance and his act of revenge, what he did was he started to create these sense of ripples. And then Barack Obama, so that created a cycle. Okay. Then when Barack Obama, he played a series of power games that created ripples like this. This is one of our inventions, so the light source invention, so you'll find out more about that later. I'm just focusing on this now about the World Peace Marketing Strategy. The second time around the circle was Barack Obama, and he wasn't able to overcome so George W. Bush created the schism between the principles and the people stand in power. Saddam Hussein stood on the principles that he was the sovereign leader of Iraq, the president of Iraq, and George Bush didn't have the right to do that, to invade him. We'll go into that much in greater depth later on. Okay, but then, so George Bush, when he did that, it threatened his security and support, and he went down into the power games. But then he had other people advising him and telling him what to do, and like the neocons and the people who function for their own interests. So then what happened then is Barack Obama didn't have, in the second cycle, wasn't able to overcome and create a sense of balance again. He wasn't able to overcome that. And that set the stage for the third group time around, and that was with Donald Trump. So now what we're doing is we're looking at this idea of the people who function for their own interests, and how when the Republicans resisted, they were able to bring in Donald Trump and basically grab for power. They had, why wasn't Jeb Bush the one they went for? Because Jeb Bush would have, and it was because Jeb Bush and the Bush family hadn't resolved the issue of the Iraq War, and people didn't go along with that idea. So what happens next with this is, if these series of cycles, the three turns around the cycle, the playing like three terms, three presidents, what happens then is that if each time the ripples get worse, and now we're seeing like food shortages, we're seeing economic crisis again, and these are the same things that happened under the Bush administration. Obama was able to kind of counter those, but not enough to stop the next cycle from coming. Okay, so when Trump got into office, he's playing the same series of games. In fact, if you look at comparisons between him and George Bush, you'll see Trump is playing the same games, only on steroids. It's much more extreme. Okay, what happens then is that if we don't counter the effects of what Donald Trump has done, what will happen is, by standing on the principles of doing what's in everyone's best interest, I've explained how we go down like this and then come up again. If we don't choose to come up again like that, and to stand on the principles of doing what's in everyone's best interest, then the United States will become a failed state. We won't have any government. Now, that is when Vladimir Putin is probably going to come in, and we are basically in a situation where England was back in the 5,000 years ago at Oxford. So that is something that I'll talk about next, is Oxford and Stonehenge, and why that's important. Our projects go into all of this in much greater depth. I'm not just pulling this out of the air. So you'll be able to read all this information, not so much this information, but you'll be able to extrapolate the same amount of information that I've been able to do, because I'm one step ahead of you. Okay. So in the World Peace Marketing Strategy, what happens next is, for the people who function for their own interess, and going back to look at Oxford and Stonehenge 5,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago, what difference does it make? The last event that happened at Stonehenge was vandalized by they had been dealing with rights of conflict resolution, but what happened is, somebody who functioned for their own interests came in, like what's happening now. So let's say that Russia comes in and functions for their own interests, then we're dealing with hostile takeovers of our country. But now what we're doing is we're looking at Donald Trump and what happens to him. So all of these things, the legalities of what he's doing is like starting a rebellion. Basically what we're doing is he's looking at the next event in that fourth row is Tor Hana's freedom. Okay, in England, they have tors. A tor is like a mound, like a small mountain that's basically a bunch of big rocks that have floated up, and you see them all over in England. But what they did is, in those days, they didn't have prisons. What they did was they buried, when somebody was creating a lot of chaos, they buried them alive in a tor. There's I can't remember the name of the tor that they have, but there's like a straight path to the tor, and then there's a town, and then straight path to the tor, and then there it is. So what happened, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tor Hana's freedom. Hana was somebody who was creating mayhem. She was like, let's say Mary Magdalene was another example of that, a person who was creating mayhem, and Mary Magdalene was going to be stoned, and Jesus stood up and defended her. Okay. Another example of this possibly was Merlin, and the abuse of power that it's an abuse of power. It's revenge, using your power to get revenge, working maybe on both sides. If Mary Magdalene was a prostitute or Hana was a prostitute and getting revenge, she had immense power. Another person that was probably this kind of person was with Joan of Arc. Before she left, she had to deal with a crazy person. A woman who had been creating havoc in their town, and she had to address this issue. Well, at the time, in the 100 Years' War, the Burgundians during Henry V's reign, they had moved into France, from England to France, and then they had put English lords in that area, and then they were trying to control France, to take it over, and they were let's say infiltrating into France to make sure that they didn't have the rightful king wasn't going to rise up and take the throne. So that was the story behind that. Joan had to face somebody like this who functioned for their own interests, somebody who was working with the Burgundians, working with the hostile takeover of the land, let's say a traitor or a spy kind of person, somebody who was creating mayhem and out of control. So what do you do when somebody moves in and is causing all this problem? Okay, Tor Hana's freedom is a program that we have in our organization. That's the next thing after all these waves. Rather than having a failed state, Tor Hana's freedom is the solution. If Donald Trump is paying all the price for all the crimes that he's committed, all the mayhem, let's say he invites Russia in, I'm not saying he's going to do that, because we're going to introduce this idea of Tor Hana's freedom. And what that does is it allows him to understand, let's say that Barack Obama and Joe Biden know about the plan for peace, but Trump is trying to stop it and bringing in power from Russia to do that. I'm not saying that this is an act of sedition. I'm not calling it anything like that. I'm saying that, like, we're back in Stonehenge when Tor Hana was here and it was alive. She was buried alive. And then, but what would happen, or Mary Magdalene, what would happen if they were offered their freedom, but like, and not that they go into prison, but like a child, put in time out for a while, and that they could come out, but they would be educated and they would learn how to solve these problems. So that's what this is. Putting somebody into a prison situation, but then allowed to come out and be educated in this idea And then somebody is going to assume responsibility for that person, and that somebody that person will listen to. Not say Trump goes into prison, but not just thrown in there and the lock turned away, because otherwise what happens is his followers are going to cause problems. What it would have to be would be somebody who would go into the jail situation, come out, participate in the plan for world peace, go back in and work to solve the problem. Basically is like being indoctrinated again into the idea of a peaceful situation, turned around so that person is no longer functioning for his own interests, but allowed to function like this. Our organization has people who are functioning like this, and we have a plan for a play that is going to be shown at the conference in Europe. That situation is going to be, it's a William Shakespeare play, and it's going to explain how these people are functioning outside the law, outside, they're going to go, they're creating mayhem, they're doing heinous things, crimes, but instead of going in there and you lock the door and you throw away the key and they're going to be in there forever. Hana was in the Torah for what, 5,000 years, and then one day she came to me and another woman, their channel in their group, and asked for us to help her. And so this is what we're doing, is we're helping Hana by introducing this plan for Tor Hana's freedom. Okay, after 5,000 years, the mayhem, has she learned her lesson? Okay, now can we kind of like crunch the years, the dimensions a little bit, and come up with a non-profit group that's going to help people who are creating all this mayhem? 25% of the population could be perpetrating an act of rebellion. Are we going to put 25% of the population in prison? Okay, so now the next step is, what happens is if that doesn't work, if they're not listening, if they're not willing to be, let's say, not indoctrinated, that sounds so how about say turned around? It sounds less like we're going to use some sort of shock treatment or something like that on them, or something where we're going to make them fit into society, but yet we need to turn them around. So what would Hana do if she was allowed to come out and to experience this idea of world peace and be part of that? So the first lesson would be like coming out and understanding about revenge, how it works, why it doesn't work, where true power comes from. Does it come from perpetrating acts of revenge? No. True power comes from assuming responsibility. And that's what happens in Congress. It's not, if Mitch McConnell, for example, considers himself the Grim Reaper and he's going to wipe out anything that Congress has done, well, Congress has the right to solve problems too. Okay, so in the fourth row, after Tor Hana's freedom, then comes the time machine, and that is going to be how people from the past are brought up into the future. We're going to crunch Lady Gaia, the female aspect of God, is going to help us crunch the dimensions and bring these people up to experience the same thing that Hana would have learned, starting with the time of Jesus, people coming into the future. I have no idea how Lady Gaia is planning to do this yet. Time travel is the solution. So what we're doing is we're looking at these people from the past. Every 100 years, somebody from the time of Jesus, let's say 1 AD BC or whatever it is, the beginning, and then 100 years after that, 200 years after that, and incrementally we're going to bring up all these people and like teach them how they can go back and affect the past, like a time travel idea. Now the last thing that I'm going to say is we're going to look at time and time travel, how time travel can work, and we're going to look at some books by Seth, the books that are going to be sold in our bookstore, and they're going to be the Museum of Time and the Education of Oversoul 7. That series of books, it's a remarkable book that he and Jane Roberts worked on, and on how time travel works. Okay, so this is where we are now, and how we can address these issues and change time and go back into time, change time, like Hana coming out, learning about it, and then going back into the tour, and then or going like Donald Trump coming out, learning about the plan for world peace, going back into jail. So this is not something where he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. He's going to come out, learn how where true power comes from, go back in, and then he's going to, hopefully, he's going to be assimilated into the plan for world peace. Maybe instead of being in jail and paying off, doing all these crimes, along with the 25% of the population. We are not, if his followers are there, we have to do something about all that 25% of the population, because we're not going to spend the rest of our lives building prisons to keep people in. We have to solve this problem now. Okay, so this is the fourth row group of people. They're the last people to come in, but we have to address this issue of time travel for all these people now, because otherwise things are going to get very bad. If Donald Trump and the world leaders like him and Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are functioning for their own interest, and they're going to wage war on us, they're going to jockey for power and take over the United States because they can, because they're undermining U.S. security with their influence on our elections or whatever. It's time for this to be addressed. And our plan for world peace basically is going to have solutions for everything. So I ask that you share this information with your family and friends. Open it up for debate. Is this the solution? If you can come up with a better plan, share it with everybody. Talk about it. Open it up for debate. Like, share, and subscribe, and then share this information with your family and friends and talk about it. See what you can come up with. If you can come up with a better plan, we'll do that. Okay, we have God's blessing on this, and God understands where people are, and there's a pathway to heaven basically for everybody. People don't have to be buried alive in a tour forever, 5,000 years. We can come up with a solution. So that's it for right now.